supply chainers, wherever you are in the world. This is Sarah Barnes-Humphrey with you today. Are you ready? Let's talk supply chain. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Thoughts and Coffee. My name is Sarah Barnes-Humphrey. I'm the founder and host of Let's Talk Supply Chain, the Blended podcast, and the founder of the Blended Pledge. And I'm super excited to be here with you today. We've got Scott coming at you from Gaines Systems, and we're going to be talking all about data, bias in data. I've learned some new terms from some of the articles that we're going to be talking about today. But if you're joining us, why don't you put a comment and let us know where you are tuning in from. We'd love to hear from you. And if you have any questions for either of us throughout the show, make sure to put that in the comments as well. Well, we couldn't do this show without a word from our sponsor. So head over to secretsocietyofsupplychain.com if you are looking for a community of like-minded professionals in the industry. We've got a ton of stuff for you. We've got the supply chainers. We've got a woman in supply chain executive group, connections group. Plus, we've even got a membership group for marketing professionals in supply chain as well that we are collaborating on, excuse me, with Supply Chain Brain. So head over to secretsocietyofsupplychain.com and sign up today. We've got a free group. You can get in there, see what it's all about, and then take it from there. All right, let's talk about what is happening at Let's Talk Supply Chain today. So we've got a brand new episode with Werner Transportation, and we're talking about how they are keeping America moving. But in this particular episode, it's episode 446, wherever you check out the show. I would highly recommend you go and check it out. He is talking about what's happening in Mexico and how they're moving goods across the border, what that looks like, especially if you are looking to manufacture some of your products in Mexico as well. So go and check that out, episode 446. Now, if you don't get enough of us live today, I'm going to be co-hosting with MVK from Coupa on the Margins live tomorrow at 11:30 a.m. Eastern, back here. So come and check out that episode with us. Click the attend button. Even if you can't attend live, we'll send you the link. We're going to be talking about uncovering hidden value with procurement. We're going to be talking to Anne Marie McCarthy from Bottom Line. You're not going to want to miss that. We've got trivia tomorrow, and I think you can win a pickleball set as well. So come and join us at 11:30 tomorrow. And then we've got some webinars coming up. So this one is in conjunction with Supply Chain Brain and Anaplan, the untold story of supply chain. Click the link in the comments. If you're over on my personal LinkedIn, I'll put that in after the show. But click the link, register now. That is going to be January 28th at 2 p.m. Eastern. And then I'm going to be hosting a webinar the following day, January 29th at 1 p.m. Eastern, in conjunction with BlackBerry Radar. And we're going to be talking about supply chain technology integration. Now, this is probably something I get asked a lot about because I talk to a lot of technology companies, and everybody wants to know about integration. How easy, how hard, how long, how many resources is it going to take? So register at the link in the comments, or I'm going to put that in the link on my personal LinkedIn after the show. Register, come and join us. It's going to be a really great discussion. And last but not least, I've got a couple more webinars coming up. Thursday, January 30th and Tuesday, February 4th, both in partnership with Supply Chain Brain. One is WSI, the other one is CargoWise. And where are we going to be in person? Well, we're going to be at Manifest February 10th through 12th. If you're going to be there, make sure to come and say hi. We're going to be recording some podcasts in booths at the show, so that's going to be a lot of fun. And then TPM March 2nd through 5th, I'm going to be there and hosting TPM TV, so I'm going to get to talk to a lot of folks. And then again, Home Delivery World, May 21st and 22nd, this time in Nashville. I'm also going to be recording on site there as well. So if you are at any of those shows, please come and say hi. I'd love to see you and get to know you. And yeah, I think it's going to be great. All right. Now it's time to bring up Scott. Scott, hello. How are you?
Hi, Sarah. I am great. Good to see you again.
It's good to see you too. The sun is shining. I don't know if anybody can tell, but my lighting's a little bit different today because the sun is actually shining in Toronto. But what I have to tell you is it is minus 25 degrees Celsius outside. And that's why I've got a sweater on because I don't know. In this weather, you can't even stay warm. Like you're just cold all the time. I don't know about you. I don't know where you are in the world, but
I am actually based in Atlanta. It's very cloudy, but very cold here. Not quite that cold, but there's winter storm warnings, which will amount to nothing, being that we're in Atlanta, but it's pretty chilly here for Atlanta.
But and you guys got snow. You guys got a lot of snow a couple of weeks ago. Did that wreak havoc, or did your family go out there and start, creating snowmen?
It was a little bit of both. Yeah, the kids were sleighing in the neighborhoods, but the shelves were still empty of bread and milk and all the basics, just as you would expect. So.
Wow. Well, that actually helps us with what we're going to be talking about today, because we're going to be talking about supply chain planning. We're going to be talking about the data usage in planning and how we best need to use all of that. Now, for anybody who doesn't know who you are, can you tell everybody who you are and what you do?
Absolutely. So, hi, everybody. I'm Scott Fenwick, Vice President of Product Management here at 𝐲𝐻𝐻. I'm about 6, almost 7 months into my journey with 𝐲𝐻𝐻, but I've been doing supply chain planning for close to 30 years.
Wow.
Prior to joining 𝐲𝐻𝐻, I don't look that old, do I? But prior to joining 𝐲𝐻𝐻, I was with Manhattan Associates, where I led their supply chain planning solutions from a product management perspective as well. And I'm excited to be here.
Yes, we're excited to have you here. Now, things are a little bit different today because we've got 2 polls. We actually polled the audience on 2 questions. One of them was provided by 𝐲𝐻𝐻 because we wanted to see what the community was talking about around composable technology. But I'm going to start with one that is a little bit different from that. So we're going to start with, if you could master one skill instantly, what would it be? Well, 63% of you said learning a new language. That is a big percentage because we had 242 votes on this one. 26% of you said playing an instrument. 8% of you said painting or drawing, and 2% said other, and I think commented below, which I'll get to in just a minute. But I can't believe it's 63% wanting to learn a new language. Now I want to know, I'm very curious as to what that language is that they want to learn. What did you think about this? Are you in the learning a new language kind of category, or?
I am not. No, I'm a practical person, but learning a new language at this point, I'm not sure that where that's going to take me. But I'm more of a play an instrument kind of guy. I would have gone with A. That would be fun at this point in my career, my life, just to take on a new skill.
Yeah, I tried guitar and I tried piano when I was younger. I don't think I did either very well. Currently, I'm taking singing lessons. I love to sing, but at the same time, the singing lessons and the training, it trains your vocal cords at the same time. And it helps me in what I do for Let's Talk Supply Chain because I speak for a living. And so strong vocal cords are really important for me. So that's interesting. I graduated French immersion, which I don't think most people know. And I also took Spanish in high school as well. I think I wanted to take Mandarin at some point, but then I was like, I don't know if I'll be any good at that.
You're aiming high. That's impressive.
All right, let's get to our second poll. Now, this one, what's the most critical factor when adopting a composable supply chain solution? Now, we had about 31 votes on this one, 42%, because it was a little bit more niche, but 42% of you said ease of integration, 39% of you said flexibility and APIs, 13% of you said customer ROI. Now, Scott, what is a composable supply chain solution? Let's start with that. And then I want to know if any of these numbers kind of surprised you at all.
Yeah, so I think the term composable is one of those terms that's highly at risk in our space at becoming so overused that its meaning starts to get lost a bit. Kind of like cloud, right? I mean, if someone uses the term cloud, you need a few more qualifiers to really understand exactly what they mean from a technical perspective. But in our perspective, a composable supply chain is really a little bit different. I think a lot of folks in the industry, when they think about composable, they just think about APIs. But the challenge with that mindset, and APIs are absolutely a big part of composability, but in a lot of cases, when they think about an API, they're thinking about a module. I need an API into replenishment. I need an API into demand forecasting. We see it a little bit different. Yes, the APIs are important, but when we think about composability, we think much more granular. We think about how can you take a space, a problem, a business process, and break it down into very discrete components that in and of themselves can provide real value. And our entire strategy is really built around the idea that if you could solve very specific problems versus having to rip and replace entire systems, how might that change your decision making, and how might that drive incremental value? So when I look at those poll results, it's not surprising to see so heavy on the API side and ease of integration, because I think those essentially go hand in hand. Because if you can't solve those problems, you can't really take advantage of the APIs. But for me, the most important aspect of a composable strategy is figure out, well, what areas of the business might need assistance, and how can we rethink how we're defining those APIs in a way that might actually enable me to get value much quicker. I would have been super excited if I saw a customer ROI was much higher, because in our perspective, that's really what a composable strategy is about, is how can you drive business value much more quickly than we as an industry have been able to achieve in the past.
Interesting. And I want to let everybody know that 𝐲𝐻𝐻 actually has a blog on this supply chain management and the composable technology revolution. We've put the link in the comments for you. I will go and do that on my personal LinkedIn after the show as well, if you want some more information on this and find out. We did have a comment from Pete. He says user adoption should have been one of the options. What do you think about that?
I agree, but that kind of likens back to how technology has been consumed by the industry over the years. I mean, if you think about the way we've gone from on-premises to even cloud solutions, we're still mostly talking about how am I as a business going to adopt a new planning solution. And those are big, risky, complex projects that, yes, if you don't get user adoption, those efforts are largely not going to yield value. But if you're solving one very small specific problem, the adoption rate should be much higher, because you're solving a specific problem that the business believes is going to drive, measurable business value. So again, it's a difference in the level of granularity. And in our world, we want our customers to be able to come to us and literally say, we have a problem with lead time, we have a problem with service stock, we have a problem with, and the list just kind of goes on. And we want to be able to solve those problems without having to go rip and replace their entire legacy system.
Right. And I really like the way that you, Amber, the team at 𝐲𝐻𝐻 thinks about technology, and you think about the integration of it, the adoption of it, the user experience of it. And we're going to get into a little bit more about that, because I had Amber on the podcast just a couple of weeks ago, and she was talking about bias in data. And our first article is going to be talking about data. It talks about the beauty industry, but this kind of goes across all industries. And I can't wait to sort of get to that. But before we do that, do you have a bit of a market update for us? What are you hearing from clients? What are kind of top of mind right now for them?
Yeah, as it pertains to data, I think there's always been this hunger for more data, right? There's this belief that the more data we have, the better our decisions will be. And certainly there's truth to that. More data generally does yield better results when you're thinking about things like optimization or forecasting and so forth. But I also think there's been a little bit of a misnomer in terms of the types of data that have gotten a bit more headlines over the past several years than others. If you think about the desire, or how many times have you seen written up around use cases around leveraging weather data, social media, economic data, and so forth to go drive demand forecast, or maybe change supply chain strategies. And these are not necessarily invalid use cases. The challenge, though, is that you have to be a bit more pertinent in terms of what types of data you're really trying to leverage. And one of our scientists here at 𝐲𝐻𝐻 did a nice job at kind of breaking down some of the misnomers around data. And his point was, in a lot of cases, some of the data that we want to use as an industry isn't really available in advance. If you think about a weather forecast, I mean, you do get a weather forecast, but the accuracy of that's always questionable. And you can sometimes use it to better prepare, but how accurate is it going to be in the long term?
Yeah.
Where planning really, plays a strong role. Same thing with social media. It's like, yes, we often do see reactions to social media drive certain industries, certain retail industries as well. But how much time do you have that data in advance and can react to it? And so we're trying to approach it a little bit differently. Not that those use cases won't play a role in our strategy, but we're trying to approach it from a perspective of let's help qualify the data in advance, because what we don't want is to have our business customers, our partners leverage, embrace these large projects, long, risky projects, trying to get value out of data that long-term probably won't really fundamentally change their business. But I do believe it all goes back to this hunger of trying to find ways to leverage AI, ML, and big data storage and so forth to our advantage from a business perspective. And so that I 100% believe that is a valid goal.
Yeah.
But what data is the real question?
Well, and I think it changes all the time, right? You're almost chasing something that you can't necessarily catch and capture, that's going to stay as your there's a foundation piece of it, sure, but data is changing all the time. And like you said, social media, whether they have cloud machines now or something like that, like that we might be able to predict because somebody could tell us when they're going to turn that on. But weather in general is not something that we can definitely predict all the time, especially with everything that's been going on. So in talking about that, I do want to get to our first article. And the reason why I picked this article was because it's about data, but it's also about collaboration. Now, this is specific to the beauty care industry, but this can be related to all sorts of different industries. And the thing that I wanted to point out is that the beauty and personal care industry is a $648 billion industry. That's a lot. There's a lot of competition in there. There's a lot of companies that are creating products. And there's also a 200 million chemical global registry. And what this article talks about is how they are going to be able to leverage data to really come up with clean products for the consumer. Now, consumers are asking for that, right? They're asking for clean products. They no longer want chemicals in the products that they're using. But this industry isn't very regulated. So what this article talks about is how they are sort of trying to regulate themselves, and they're using data to be able to do that. But they're bringing data together in a credible way. They're looking for objective data to inform the ingredient safety that they want to bring to the market. Now, one of the things that Amber talked about in episode, I think it was 445, that you guys might want to go and check out. And Nicole, if you can put the link to that podcast in the comments, I would appreciate that, because she talks about data, but she also talks about bias in the data and how human beings actually bring bias into data. And sometimes we don't like the decision or the final outcome that data is providing to us. And then there's inherent bias from the actual person who is interpreting the data. So talk to me about this. You're heavily involved in data, Scott, right? Especially with 𝐲𝐻𝐻. Data is kind of the foundation of how you work with your customers. So this talks about collaborative data. Amber talked about bias in data. So we have to be a little bit careful when we do collaborate, make sure there's no bias in there. But how do we collaborate to make sure that we can solve or maybe have a shared data repository that helps us measure some of the things that we want to measure?
Yeah, sure. Well, I think that the two things come to mind. One is that I think what Ulta and Sephora and others are trying to do is admirable, because certainly consumers care about that, right? And as you noted earlier in the article, I think just the fact that they are trying to be more responsible and trying to be more transparent with those things is going to have an impact on how consumers, embrace their brand. But more specifically to the data itself, kind of back to the comments I was making earlier, the quality of the data does matter. And I think some of those challenges can be solved. And these are not simple or cheap sometimes projects, but some of those challenges can be solved by creating more transparency into the data and having more objective ways of trying to measure the potential meaning of the data. And some of this really does require, you just kind of separate the human from the interpretation of the data. And that's a tough thing to embrace in some regards, because we all know that as the industry is quickly making advances in AI and ML, there's a trust factor that has to be built up.
Yes.
Exactly. And
There
so
absolutely is. And especially if you're going to collaborate on a shared data repository, which they're talking about
right,
in this particular article, people are hesitant to come together and share
yeah,
data, anyways. But
right,
then you add that layer, you add that layer of trust to it, right? You have to then trust each other to provide
exactly.
the right data into that repository. So there are so many layers to this. And we kind of talk about how collaboration is the future of business, but there's stepping stones to getting there.
Agreed.
Yeah.
Agreed.
All
Bite
right.
size, just like the composability strategy, right? Bite-sized chunks.
Yeah. All right. Let's get to our second article. So this is a blog that actually Amber wrote for 𝐉𝐚𝐧𝐮𝐚𝐫𝐲. And I really liked reading through this article because she talked about the Gartner Supply Chain Planning Summit. And there was some terminology that I thought was kind of cool that came out of this, but I want to read out some of the stats. So 75% of organizations are exploring AI in supply chain planning. Like, supply chain planning is one portion of supply chain, and 75% of organizations are exploring that. So we'll get back to you, Scott, for that one in just a second. 65% are using data to justify decisions. Like, these are big, big, big numbers because we talk about data, we talk about AI, we talk about how people are utilizing that. But these are big numbers of people actually using it and thinking about it. What did you think about these stats?
I think it's not terribly surprising, actually, from my perspective,
Fair.
because if you think about supply chain planning in general, it's been about optimization. I mean, our space is one of a few in the supply chain arena that is really focused on optimization. I mean, everybody talks about optimization, but when you're thinking about warehouse management and or labor management and so forth, yes, there's optimization there, but a lot of that is just how do I more effectively handle transactions? Supply chain planning has relied on its ability to kind of look to the near term, yes, but more long-term planning. And just the inherent nature of that optimization has kind of driven us to try to rely on as much data as we can. Now, historically, that data has been historical sales, historical supply outages, vendor performance, things like that. But I think we've been more reliant on the need for data. So it's not terribly surprising to me that, that we're seeing much more movement in AI and ML in that space, because those practices, those technologies thrive where there's lots of data and really good data.
Yeah. So, and that's really good points. I want to actually point out some terminology that was used in this because I highly recommend going to check out this particular article. Range-based planning. Now, I haven't heard that terminology a lot. You may hear that a lot in what you're doing, but I haven't heard that a lot. But basically what it said is multiple possibilities instead of a fixed outcome from the data. And I thought that was interesting, right? Is being open to the possibilities of what the data is going to bring to you as far as what the different outcomes could be, rather than fixating on one particular outcome that you kind of want it to be. That's where the bias comes in, right? We want
Right.
the data to be able to tell us. We don't want to necessarily be the one telling the data which
Right.
outcome that we want specifically. And I think with possibilities comes options. And so I really liked that one. The other one I really liked also was self-healing supply chains. And they were talking about AstraZeneca adapting autonomously to disruption. So those were two new sort of terminology for me, and I think it probably is for the audience as well. Do you have anything to add on those maybe before we go to our next article?
Yeah, sure. So I think as a practice, we all love certainty, right? We all love to know
Yes, we
how's
do.
my day going to go, how's my week going to go, and boy, if it would just ever play out like that, that would be fantastic. But the fact of the matter is, uncertainty plays a role in every one of our lives, and certainly in our supply chains. And so we've taken the approach of embracing that uncertainty and trying to consider that in our supply chain planning. So instead of having a more deterministic approach to our math models, where a given set of inputs has one and only one output, we've started to look at things a bit more broadly. And the idea that they're given a set of circumstances that could change as the future plays out, what's the likelihood that this reality is going to manifest? And you can use the weather forecast as a great example. Those percentages of certainty certainly change day in and day out. If I track last week they were calling for snow today, and Now we're getting cloudy and cold, but the closer we got, the more certain that forecast was.
Right.
But by leveraging those probabilities and presenting ranges, now the business has more tools, especially over the mid to long term, to try to make better planning decisions. So what happens if we start to have supply shortages from these particular regions of the world? What might my desired outcome be? How can I potentially manage that? And so by embracing uncertainty, because you can't really manage it, you can't really eliminate it, but by embracing it all the way down at the math level, that helps us to provide our customers a better set of tools to go plan for those potential outcomes.
Yeah, I envy weather people, right? They only have to be right. What is it, like 50% of the time?
If we're
And I
lucky.
feel like in supply chain, we have so much pressure to be
Yeah,
right either way, and we're dealing with the same variables.
exactly.
All right. Well, we've got time for one more article. We're going to just spend a couple of minutes on this one because it's a hot button issue. We're talking about tariffs. So
Mhm.
retailers are bracing for the impact of tariffs, although we still don't know what that's going to be because, we were told yesterday from the new administration, possibly February 1st. But tariffs directly affects inventory management. And this article actually talks a lot about that. They're talking about off-price retailers. So like a Marshall's, a TJX, a Ross, a Burlington. And they're talking about how that particular buying model doesn't change very much with tariffs. If companies and retailers are buying and they're overstocking their inventory and don't sell it, it actually goes to them and the pricing actually doesn't change too much, which is a very, very interesting take on who benefits and who doesn't when tariffs are coming in, especially when people are buying directly from the regions that are supposed to be hit. But stocking up on inventory is not necessarily easy right now. It demands more capital and financing costs are really high at the moment. And so it might not necessarily be an option for some of those retailers that are bracing for tariffs. So now, Scott, I know that 𝐉𝐚𝐧 gets involved. Obviously, this is part of the planning process. How do you plan? This is a variable that you kind of just mentioned. We don't know what's going to happen. What did you
Yeah.
think about this? Really high level. What do you think people should be thinking about?
I think it's incredibly interesting because a lot of it does go back to the fundamentals of planning, and understanding your cost is one of the biggest challenges that let's say a mainstream retailer. We'll come back to some of those some of those deep discount retailers perhaps, but dealing with understanding your cost and being able to factor that into your plan is a big part of just getting the plan correct. And I know just from firsthand that a lot of folks, as they manage their inventory, they don't really manage their costs extremely well. They use approximations, and sometimes if you go back and pull a number of your customers and ask them how often do they go back and reanalyze the costs that they're using, to optimize their supply chain, in a lot of cases they're the same costs that were input X number of years ago when they installed the solution. And so I think it's going to be important to try to keep those up to date and understand how these potential changes as it pertains to tariffs might impact those costs. It is interesting, though, that when you look at some of those retailers that are mentioned in that article, I've worked with some of those in my past, and in a lot of cases, they get their inventory secondhand, right? They're not buying that inventory, directly from the manufacturer. They're buying it from others who've kind of reached the end of life, and they've already been marked down and marked down and marked down. And so they're kind of picking up that inventory at the end of its life cycle and trying to make as much of it as they can. So for them, there might be an impact on cost, as some of those costs do tend to get passed along. But it's going to have a much less impact than it would certainly on a mainstream retailer. So I think it's going to be an interesting situation to see how things play out this year. But I think it does, for me as a practitioner, I would certainly encourage the audience to just make sure they're staying on top of their costs. They're thinking about leveraging whatever what if scenarios they have in their planning tools to understand what those impacts might be, so that they're not caught off guard.
Well, and make sure you've got partners and technology that can help you to do that. Because I remember being at the 𝐉𝐚𝐧 conference and I
Mhm.
interviewed a lot of your clients, and they were talking about how they were able to take capital out of inventory.
Yeah,
And now with this coming through, it sort of put a wrench in those plans. But if you have the right partners, the right technology, you're able to put the right plan in place. Scott,
right.
thank you so much for joining me today. I want to do a quick shout out to Raj over on my personal LinkedIn. Thanks for joining us. Thanks to everybody who joined us for the show today. Check out those links, go to those articles. There's a lot more in there for you to take into your day. But thanks everybody for joining.